Okay, it's 6:30. I'll call the meeting to order for the Oregon School District Board of Education. It's Monday, August 24th. We are participating remotely. Can you call the roll, Katie?
Ms. Garrison, Mr. Maring,
Here.
Ms. Flanagan,
Here.
Mr. Pankratz,
Here.
Ms. Bijak,
Here.
Mr. LeBrun, Mr. Zach.
Present, and Heather contacted me a couple weeks ago. She's camping. Picked a nice night to go camping. It'll be nice and cool. Hopefully she's near some water. Anyway, and we expect that Tim will join us. And so Katie, when he joins in, will you just note his appearance when he joins?
But
I've seen proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin open meetings law. And for any of the viewing public, that is available with Katie Heights at the district office if you want to inspect it. Our agenda tonight consists of a number of action items, including potential look at a steering ad hoc committee for Worth Woods, approving our annual meeting agenda, 2 policies from policy committee, and then we'll have information items, an anti-hate speed implementation report from the committee, and an opening school year report from Dr. Bergstrom. Board then is going to go into closed session to discuss how we're going to evaluate you, Dr. Bergstrom. So we'll do that at the end of the meeting, assuming we don't go too late tonight, which I don't think we will. That will be a fairly brief conversation, I think, not more than 15 minutes to a half an hour. And we will not be returning to open session from closed session. So I need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
So moved. This is Anna.
Is there a second?
I'll second. This is Troy.
Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun, are you here yet? Nope. Mr. Zach.
Yes, we have an agenda. Item A on the agenda is our consent calendar. Is there any item on the consent calendar that any board member wishes to remove? And Kevin, I would note that you were not at the last board meeting, so we typically have you abstaining from voting on the minutes as part of the, but you can vote with respect to the remainder of the consent calendar items. So however you vote, we
This
just.
is Tim. Can you hear me now?
Hi, Tim.
Hi, Steve. This is Tim. Can you hear me?
We can, you're good.
I'm having a hard time getting online for some reason, so I'm just calling in, and I'm still
Okay.
working on getting online. I just want to note that the minutes for last meeting were not quite done yet, so those should be pulled out as being as not being ready for approval.
For the last board meeting?
Yes.
They're not in the packet, Steve, this time.
Oh, okay. So then we just don't have minutes. Okay, got it.
Okay. That's all. I just
So
wanted
then
to
you
make
don't
note of
get-
that. I didn't see them.
Great, thanks. And I didn't pick up that they weren't there. Kevin, so you don't have to abstain because we're not voting on it, so there we go. But I would need a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
So moved, Kevin.
Is
Second,
there a
Tim.
second? Okay, roll call, Katie.
Tim, second.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, items on the consent calendar are approved. Takes us to item B on information. Katie?
Nope, we have
No.
not.
Okay, OEA report. Laura Stoller, I think you have a brief report for us.
I do.
Proceed.
Just The leadership of the OEA has been invited to be a part of the conversations and committees throughout the summer as the Oregon School District worked tirelessly to gather information, formulate plans, and make decisions about how to safely and most effectively open school this fall. We feel very fortunate to have been at the various tables throughout the summer and appreciate the continued collaboration. During that process, we have found that our teachers, like the parents and families in our district, have varying concerns, questions, and comfort levels when it comes to in-person meetings and instructions. While many teachers were only somewhat concerned earlier in the summer, as time draws nearer, and perhaps more critically, as COVID numbers and health guidance continues to change, so do the concerns, questions, and comfort levels of our community. As scientific study continues and our understandings of the disease grows, we hope that our teachers, like our families, will be afforded patience and understanding as they make decisions that require balancing their safety with their role at schools. We look forward to continuing the collaboration and appreciate the tremendous work of our district administration as they led and continue to lead all of us through this unusual year. The inclusivity of all stakeholders, which would be families, staff, administrators, educators, and the wider community, in the decision-making process is ultimately what will allow our community to unite during this chaotic time, and we are grateful for that endeavor.
Thank you,
And that
Laura.
is the end of our report.
Thank you, Laura. And board, we had a hour-plus conversation with OEA Laura and Jason and Leslie and I this afternoon just to do a check-in with respect to the Dane County order. We'll hear more of that from Leslie later in the meeting. Okay, thanks, Laura. Appreciate your leadership through this on behalf of the OEA, you and Jason. And Nate, I saw you there too. Student report, we have two students coming on as our board reps, Chloe Jacobson and Andrew Palmer. I don't think they're here tonight. I said we would start the first meeting in September. They will join us virtually. So we look forward to meeting Chloe and Andrew at that time as we move forward. So we'll move on from the student report. Action item. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I did get something in an email today, and he asked me to read it as it's more from comments from the public. Could I read that?
Yeah.
Or should it go to Katie?
It should typically go to Katie, but you can read it if it pertains to an action item today. If it's about the school year opening, you can read it if that relates to that.
It is about the last board meeting.
Okay, go ahead. You can read it. It's a public comment in the fairness of.
All right.
We'll proceed.
And so this came from Jim Vogt. He is a resident in Oregon. And he said, hi, Tim. I'm writing to you because tonight's board meeting will not have a public comment period. I understand that payment of employees and bus contractors during virtual learning was an action item at the most recent board meeting on August 10th. I also understand that the minutes of that meeting have not been prepared nor made available to the public yet. I believe this action item deserves to be revisited given the sudden changes in plans for the upcoming year thrust upon all public and private schools in Dane County and the announcement made on Friday by Public Health Madison and Dane County. The rules of the game have changed since the board meeting on August 10th. I would like to believe that all the board members have first in mind the students and parents of the district and are good stewards of taxpayer money. Therefore, it was shocking to learn that $1.5 million left over from last year's budget, or $750,000, was being allocated to find meaningful work for certain groups of employees in order to keep them employed because the work they were hired to do won't exist because students won't be coming to school in person. These are very difficult times, and most businesses that haven't gone under yet are laying off people because the work isn't there. The owners don't want to do it, and they certainly get no satisfaction from doing it, but they have no choice. They are trying to survive. So those workers will have a job to come back to someday. Please take another look at the action item and ask yourself if it really helps students or parents, or does it just keep people employed by doing meaningful work? Perhaps the money would be better spent on helping the teachers with the technology side of connecting virtually with their students. I'm sure teachers are not experts in IT, and neither are the parents. You can do better than making up tasks in an effort to justify a paycheck. Thanks for listening. Sincerely, Jim Vogt.
Thanks for sharing that, Tim. And I'll reach out to Jim. I know him too, and have a conversation with him.
Sounds good. I'll let him know. Thanks.
Yep, thanks. All right, action items, C1, Worth Woods Steering Committee, an update on Worth Woods. Leslie, do you want to start with an update on that, or Andy? And then I'll talk about the proposed ad hoc conservancy oversight committee.
I can let everyone know where we are at with the process related to Fitchburg. And Andy was our representative at the, I believe it was the Planning Commission meeting last week. So Andy, feel free to pop in with anything that you notice that isn't from the summary email that you sent. Basically, Fitchburg, the Planning Commission group, said that they are now sending our the CSM for approval at the City Council meeting, which happens tomorrow night. So that the CSM or our proposal for that is up for approval at that time. And there were some conditions that were added to approval. For instance, some of the things I think are probably pretty standard, like no other permit or approval is waived or deemed satisfied except for the approval provided herein. That seems rather standard. Some of the things perhaps were not. For instance, no development shall occur on Outlot 1 or Outlot 2. But what we have been advised is that we could go back to them at a later date, putting the school and outlot, the appropriate outlots and the environmental center property all together into one outlot, and then apply to have that status changed and allow for development. So, and then a couple of other things that perhaps aren't entirely normal is future use of the property for recreational purposes may require a conditional use permit. So we're seeking a little bit of clarification on what that means. And then finally, some erosion control and stormwater management conditions. Actually, one condition where we need a permit if land disturbance will exceed 4,000 square feet. So there are some conditions related to the approval of the CSM. And we know that once it is approved, we'll be able to have a good working relationship with Fitchburg. And Mr. Marsh and I, their city administrator, had an email exchange today and plan to have a meeting in the next week or so. He may take his staff with me out to Forest Edge before our students are there and have a little tour of the building and get to know one another and begin to talk about the future of the Worth Woods property. Andy, is there anything that you think is important to mention because you were our representative at that meeting?
I think you covered it all, Leslie.
Okay.
And those sound like pretty standard requirements. Nothing seems out of the ordinary there. They're just reminding you, you need to take out permits if you're going to build something or disturb land. I think it's just a gentle reminder as opposed to something unique to the fact that the school district owns it or that we do or don't have plans for it. So I think it's just gentle reminders.
Good.
Yep. That's a good idea to go out to the property and show them, and then also to combine at some point the two lots and make that, I don't know if you're going to combine it with a school lot or how we're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
We would need to connect it to the school lot and then have one new.
As part of the conservancy.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Any questions of Leslie or Andy regarding the status? And once the CSM's approved, that clears the way for final closing on the property with the Worth Konopacki family.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And then it becomes ours. So anticipating that, I had talked with the board probably starting 2 months ago about creating an ad hoc conservancy committee, something that would not be a permanent standing committee, but would be in place for a period of time just to transition those properties into functioning units of the district. particularly at this point in time when administration's really working hard with the COVID-19 stuff to help assist them through this. And then also because there's a blur between some policy items and the operational items. The intent of this is not to wander into the operational area of the administration, but more to coordinate policy and operational stuff. So, I know Leslie and I have talked through that a little bit. I put in here a 2-year period of time. Leslie and I talked maybe just having it to the end of the 2021 school year, and then we can reassess. So I'm comfortable with that to go forward. The component of this that blends policy and operation or board stuff is that fundraising element and how that would play into developing a budget and a plan for both of those. So it was my sense that if we got a committee, it's somewhat like a task force in a sense, but I just think it ought to spin off initially as a committee of the board. So I've shared with you the language that I put together to give a charge to the committee. Leslie and I have reviewed this. Other than moving the 1 year or the 2 years to 1 year, I think, Leslie, you are comfortable with this?
Yes.
Okay, and then what we would do is, as with the other committees, the president appoints that committee. And then with respect to the subcommittees that would be working on some of the other aspects, I think Leslie and I would work together to appoint those so that we would get the appropriate administrators involved in terms of who's going to carry out the operational portions of the charges from those subcommittees. So that's how I see. Anything to add, Leslie, before we turn it over to the board for questions?
No, but I do appreciate thinking of it like as if it were a task force, because that's something that we're all very familiar with in the school district, to accomplish something large on a short-term scale and then pass it off, and it almost becomes a committee after that, where it's standing and much more permanent.
Right. So, and I preferred to call this a board committee just because of how it plays into so many different things. And I anticipate putting 3 board members on this and working from there. So any questions from any member of the board about this? Tim?
Yeah, I know that earlier this year, we talked about there being some available funds from the Forest Edge project that might be available, considering it's the same site or will be the same site. Is there still budget available to do, even if it's just foundational things, securing the property and renovate and some renovation? That maybe is an Andy question.
It is.
Yeah, I did explore that with bond counsel, and since the referendum question didn't talk about improving something like this, their recommendation would not be to utilize funds. Acquiring property was fine, but not improving.
Okay. That's my only question.
Great. Krista?
So given Tim's question, then any work of this committee that would cost money would have to be covered by fundraising. Is that correct then?
Correct. And or if the board decided upon a proper motion to spend money.
Okay.
I mean, I think the intent is that operational funds don't go to that, but that does not preclude the committee from coming to the board and requesting some from some source. Because I think why I would prefer this to be an operational committee of the board as opposed to a task force. I mean, that's how I plan.
Yeah, so I guess my question has to do with I'm really glad you brought up kind of the relationship with the task force and the 2 years to the 1 year. I support a 1 year as well, because I just think this is something new. I guess my question is, based on some things Leslie brought up at our visioning committee, where you talked about a long range planning team in terms of facilities and grounds, how would this committee or task force work within that, or how would you see those things relating to each other?
Well, for me, I would see Sorry, there's just a little bit of static. For me, I would see the development of a plan, which would be one of the things that this group would do. And I would assume that, I would be connected to the group, that the implementation of that plan would be multi-year. And to align our efforts with the implementation of that multi-year plan would be a portion of what I would consider to be my responsibilities.
Okay. And so I think I'm just a little, the first sentence talks about the committee oversees the development operations of Worth Woods. And then the second sentence is that it provides policy guidance and operational assistance. So I'm a little confused by those two things, because I agree with the second sentence that they're providing policy guidance and operational assistance, and they're developing a potential plan for the operation and fundraising of Worth Woods, but I don't think they're overseeing the development and operation of it. Or am I misunderstanding?
My intent is that for the first year, the intent of that language that they are overseeing the development, the operation through the initial phases with administration.
Okay. I guess the hierarchy.
And because that's
I
going
guess
to
the hierarchy is just a little confusing to me. And I'm not saying I'm against it. It's just a little confusing to me that, so this committee reports to the board, or this committee, or does Leslie have a seat on this committee and as part of the committee that then the administration is part of that committee that then reports back to the board? Okay.
Yes. I mean, the administration is going to be fully part of the operation of this committee.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's clear, because I think that's huge, right? That the administration oversees facilities and grounds and everything. So I just want to make sure that the administrative role is there. And I'm guessing that's your intent, but I just want to make sure that that is there. And then my next question is, how many committee members are there?
3 from the board. Operational decisions will be coordinated with administrative team members serving as liaison to the committee, just as we do with all the other committees.
Okay, so I
So-
understand there are 3 board members on the committee. How big is the committee? Are you inviting at-large membership? I'm
There
just
are, three,
asking.
no, there are 3 members of the committee, the environmental, the subcommittee committees that will be doing the work on that will have more people that will be staffed in consultation with Dr. Bergstrom and myself and the committee.
Okay, so
So
the committee is
that's-
3 people as a whole.
Pardon?
I just asked if, I'm just trying to understand that the committee is just 3 people.
Correct.
Okay,
The
I didn't
subcommittees
understand.
will be
Okay.
more that report to the committee.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to process this. You guys have been dealing with it for a long time, so we're just trying to understand.
Right, and we understand, both Leslie and I have talked through the operational stuff. The intent of this is not to subvert the distinction between operational policy, but this is so intertwined, at least at the beginning, with fundraising
Right.
and developing the plan, that it would serve well to have a committee with 3 board members doing this and working with the administration through subcommittees.
Yes, absolutely.
And that work then comes to the board to the extent the board needs to approve anything.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
sorry, my misunderstanding was that it was a larger committee than just 3 board members.
No.
Sorry.
Nope, in the committee, as I envision it, the board committee is more of an umbrella committee of those other areas, the subcommittees,
Okay.
which then are really staffed by administrative team members, some, public members. I can see with Worth Woods, we will have people involved in the development of that plan, that might be a bigger subcommittee, and then that reports back. And so there needs to be some coordination with what's happening in Worth Woods and what's happening with the environmental center. And so the committee would work on that with Dr. Bergstrom.
Yep. I got it. I understand. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah, no, it's a different animal than we've had in the past, and it's only going to be temporary until that gets in play and we get a fundraising model in place, that it becomes fully operational, and then
Yeah.
we turn it over, and hopefully then we will have an administration with a little more time to deal with that. But there are some things that need to be done out there, within the next 6 months, that and some fundraising that needs to take place to make that happen.
My last question is, are there any models out there of something similar?
Well, I haven't looked.
I was just curious.
Yeah,
That's it for
and
me.
I haven't.
I know where to look though. We've done some great work, of course, with the Green and Healthy Schools model. And I've been at conferences with people who have school forests. So I'll be able to reach out to some people.
Thank you for your work on this. That's
Yeah,
it for me.
thanks. Good questions. It's kind of confusing. Any board member with any other questions? Kind of looking. Okay, if not, since I did this, this will be abnormal, but I'm going to move approval of the charge for the committee changing the 2-year period of time to it's going to be in place until the end of the 2020-21 school year. Okay, so that we'll have a sunset. The board will have to reauthorize it at that time.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, so the motion on the table is to approve the charge for the Oversight Committee. The second paragraph would read, the committee will be in place until the end of the 2020-21 school years, after which its continued role and purpose will be evaluated by the board. We got that. So we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Mr. Zach,
I get to go first? Yay. Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Mearing,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Great. And then having approved that, my appointment would be that I'm going to appoint Tim as the chair of that. And Tim and I talked briefly about that, and he jumped up and down at the offer. But thanks. And then Kevin and Heather have agreed to serve on that as well. And I think that's something that's been right up Kevin's line. He's really interested in education, environmental education. So we really look forward to your presence on that. And then Heather brings out a ton of fundraising experience too. So I think we've got a lot of bases covered with the committee. Tim, I'll talk with you about, kind of time frame and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that sounds great. You
Great.
bet.
Dr. Bergstrom, thanks. And you and I have had enough talks about the operational versus policy thing that I think we have a comfort level about what we intend to do with this. And Krista's questions are really on point and things that we've discussed. So it's going to be a terrific asset for the community when we get this going. So great. Okay. Annual meeting agenda. Every year we need to approve the agenda for the annual meeting. That agenda is in the packet, and it's of similar nature to what we've had in the past. Gina, anything to add on that from a legal standpoint and what we have to do?
No, we look good.
Dr. Bergstrom, anything from your end in terms of board information?
Only the fact that it was discussed earlier today that perhaps it should be moved to the Oregon High School cafeteria, similar to when we did the meeting for purchasing the properties in order to ensure we have adequate space for attendees.
That makes sense. Yeah, because we're still under the order in that.
Yeah.
Anybody have any objection if we would amend it that way to do that? Okay, I need a motion to approve the agenda for the annual meeting with the one change in terms of the document that's in our packet to hold that at the high school commons as opposed to the Innovation Center. So to entertain a motion to that effect.
This is Anna. I'd move approval with the modification to hold the meeting in the school cafeteria.
Is there a second?
Tim, I'll second.
All right, motion and the seconds on the table to approve the annual meeting agenda with one change. Any further discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Mearing,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries. And then Katie, you're going to take the appropriate steps to get that appropriately published. And then we'll need to discuss whether or not we're going to have a regular board meeting after that at a later point tonight. Okay. Policy committee, 2 more policies. Anna, floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Steve. The first policy for our review and approval is policy 433, attendance and truancy. This policy was modified to include a specific section related to virtual learning or remote learning, and to continue to hold accountable the idea of taking attendance and making sure that our students are engaged, and that there's a notification process in place for our administrators in our schools to be informed if kids are going to be missing class regularly or on occasion for an appointment, those sorts of things. So the idea is, let's hold the same standards for attendance and for expectations on ensuring that students are engaged. So our policy committee did review this and did not recommend any changes, but I see that we do have a few changes that might have been proposed by Steve. Do we want to go into those, or should we have a motion first?
I just have questions, and so there are more questions in terms of that, so why don't I ask them now, because that will depend on how we proceed in terms of the motion. Can you share that, Katie, right now?
And whilst Katie's bringing that up, maybe what I'll explain is that the model that Gina proposed for our review and consideration is based on the attendance requirements that are in place for schools that are currently virtual. So there are, if you look at item number 3, for example, on here, there are 3 criteria or 3 ways to be considered being in attendance. And those 3 include, the first is that you're either present for synchronous learning. The second one is an or statement. So the second one is or they're completing and submitting assignments to the educator. And the third method is that or an educator assesses the student at least weekly and determines the student is progressing in their learning. So there were 3 ways to gauge attendance. The first of which, like I said, is to be at synchronous learning, or they're completing their assignments, or an educator is assessing their understanding and that they are learning. So those are the 3 methods that are currently in place for virtual schools. And so I just wanted to kind of explain that quickly while we were bringing this up. But Steve, why don't you go ahead and talk us through your questions?
Yeah, my questions, the first one is in the first paragraph, effective September 21, and then it states during the COVID-19 pandemic. My thought was, do we want to tie that more specifically to, a distinct time when this would be in place, and that would be when the public health emergency ends, or that just stays in place as long as the declared county public health emergency in place. I can go either way on that. It was just, as I was looking through, what's the question there? In 1, the word generally was confusing to me. I don't know that we need that. It's that, absences will not count towards truancy except where exigent circumstances exist. I don't know if generally we need that to qualify that anymore, and whether you talked about that. The third question I had was with paragraph 3, a student. Number 2 says a student attends instruction unless excused. And I'm assuming that applies to any instruction that's in person, or maybe synchronous. But 3 says, if we're virtual learning, I would rephrase that, it will be considered to have attended virtual learning. And then to me, A and B should be an and together. And then the C would become its own separate one? Because are we really saying that if we have a synchronous learning period, that the student does not have to attend that as long as they submit assignments?
Well, I think that was the original intent, wasn't it, Gina?
Yes, it was. So do you want me to wait till you're finished, Steve, or do you want me to go one by one?
I mean, this is the more substantive one. The other ones are just kind of my thought processes walking through this. But I really had a question about why those are ands instead of why those are ors instead of ands, at least with respect to A and B.
Sure. So really for two reasons. One is that DPI is requiring that we have an attendance policy for our virtual learning before school starts. And so looking to what they find sufficient for their virtual charter schools, we're modeling that. And when we talk about synchronous learning, that in terms of number 2, we do want students to attend when they're scheduled, whether that be in person or synchronous, so that we know, like, for example, if you take your family to Disney World for a week and you decide you're not going to be present for instruction, even if it's virtual, we would, the teachers in the main office would like to know that, just like we would if you were in person. So we know, do you need homework? Do you need to make up assignments? Do we need to make sure you have access to those recorded lessons? So we would.
Does that mean with 2, Gina, that the scheduled instruction means both in person where applicable and synchronous?
Yes, that we talked about that, and we would like to know, even if it's synchronous and a student isn't planning to be there, that they would let the main office know or the teacher know, so that we know it was a planned absence, because we want to make sure that our students are being engaged and that there isn't maybe an issue that is unexpected. So we would like, and we talked about, okay.
Yeah, my question would be then, shouldn't we make sure that that's clear in 2, that scheduled instruction means both in person and synchronous?
I am fine with that if the board accepts our recommendation, but from an educational perspective, if students are gone and they know that in advance, we would like to know that. Similarly, if they're not feeling well and they're not going to be on their synchronous learning, we would like to know that as well. To address your question in number 2, and then in number 3, from an equity lens, we suspect that there will be families, whether it's because their older students need to help the younger students, or if they're not able to navigate as well and they want to watch at night, or when maybe their parents are more available, that we anticipate there will be some students that aren't able to attend the synchronous learning, but if we will work with our families, and we'd like to know that in advance. So for example, if we know, okay, I'm not going to be able to be present at 10 a.m. for my science class, we wouldn't expect a parent to notify us about that every day. Just one notification would be fine, but we don't want to penalize that student in terms of attendance. And DPI does give the virtual learning schools that flexibility, that if the students are watching the recorded lessons and they're submitting assignments, that is sufficient in terms of attendance from a DPI perspective. Obviously, we would want the teacher to do, to work with that student and make sure they're engaged and they're progressing, but we wouldn't want to penalize a student from an attendance standpoint if they're not able to be on live with us.
Don't we accomplish that in 2 if we would amend that to say scheduled instruction and then a parenthetical that said in person or synchronous, and then take that out of 3? Because that gives you the same status that we know that some kids might not be able to attend synchronous learning because of various family or other factors, and if they're excused, then we're good.
But then I guess my question to that would be, is someone tracking that they're watching the video or the recording, or is it that in the recording they're being told, okay, now you need to complete page 2 of your workbook and take a picture of it and email it to me? And if they're doing what's being asked of them from that recorded session, then they're considered
having attended because they're following through with what was asked, as opposed to having to have someone track that they watched the recording. So I think this allows the student the ability to watch the assignment later or at a schedule that works for them, follow through with the expectation that's assigned, and have that count towards having attended because they've completed the work that would have been assigned from that recorded session.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding what synchronous learning is. What do we mean by that?
I think it means like for example, our schedules just came out. And so Mackenzie has her first class is science at 8:35. She's going to get onto her computer, have a screen and be watching a teacher at 8:35 for a 35-minute block of time. Then she has a 10-minute activity break. And then she jumps back on for her math class that starts at 45 minutes after that first one. So she's technically sitting in front of her computer, engaged in watching her teacher until about noon. So that's the synchronous learning, is that you're watching your teacher and maybe even communicating with your class during that time. And then so that's, I think, what is meant by the synchronous learning, is that you're in real time with your teacher.
Right, it's not a recorded session.
Correct. Well, they're recording it for you to watch later, but the intent is that you're in real time learning with your teacher, and it's being recorded. So if you cannot make it at that synchronous time, you can watch it in the evening when it works for you and still be considered having attended that day of class.
And again, this policy assumes that all sessions are recorded for later listening. That's correct, right?
Yes, that is our intent to do that.
So is it our intent that students are going to have a choice of whether to attend live or watch it later recorded?
Well, we would prefer that they watch it live, but we don't want to penalize any student who isn't able to do that.
Okay, but we would excuse them then, right?
Well, what we would ask is that the parents let us know if they're going to be in person or missing live, and they wouldn't need to tell us every day if it was a consistent scheduling challenge. But then we know that. And so to Anna's point, you described it perfectly, that if we're receiving assignments, then we know that the student is watching, or that we check in at least weekly and determine that that student is progressing, because there may be barriers to submitting assignments that we're not aware of that we have to work through. We're trying to give students the maximum flexibility to attend from a DPI perspective.
What is the classroom teacher's responsibility for taking attendance for the live synchronous session?
So we do have a committee that is working on that from an operation lens, but currently the ask is that our teachers would be taking attendance in terms of who is present for the synchronous learning, so that if the parents haven't notified us of a scheduling challenge or that the student isn't present, that student is then on our radar, and we know that we have to reach out to that student just as if we were in person and we weren't aware that there was going to be an absence.
Okay, I guess I'm still having definitional problems, because for me, synchronous learning means that you're attending live with your teacher, and the expectation is you do that unless you have an excuse.
And that is a fair explanation of the rationale, but we don't want to mark that student absent every day if we know they're not able to attend the synchronous, but they're doing the assignments and they're making progression in their work. So for example, if Kennedy has literacy at 8:30 every morning, but I have a meeting and she just can't navigate that on her own, then I can watch it with her later at 5 o'clock and she isn't considered to be absent every day.
So if we have a student who decides that the student's just going to watch the recording and submit the assignments, that's going to pass muster with us, even though they don't attend one synchronous session.
Under this policy, that's the flexibility we're asking for because we don't want to penalize our students who might not be able to navigate the synchronous learning independently.
But what if we have a student who just doesn't want to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and attend the second synchronous session and then just wants to watch it at night? We're okay with that then, that they're not marked absence and they don't have to attend that session? I totally get the equity piece of it. I'm looking at the other end of it and the kids who, while they could attend synchronous learning, choose not to, and then just watch a recording. And I want to make sure that if we're okay with that, then they're submitting their assignments, whether we're good with that.
Hey, this is Kevin. Just a quick comment. I mean, I'm agreeing with the train of thought Steve is going down. I mean, I would hope we could handle exceptions as exceptions, but for what it's worth, I agree with. It's the first thought when I heard all the ors. That's the first thought I had.
May I make a comment, Gina? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I think our point, as in-person instruction, is mastery of the standards. And so being able to demonstrate mastery of the standards is the number one piece. If a student is able to do that and isn't showing up in a synchronous fashion, but the teacher is able to check in continuously with this person to ensure that they're doing okay. Because I would be more concerned about, the social emotional status of a student who never showed up and only submitted lessons, because I'd wonder how they were doing personally when I never saw their face and never heard them talk. So I think there's mastery of the standards, and then there's also that relationship building and connection. And we want all our kids to attend synchronous, and when they're not, there should be a good reason. But at the same time, we don't want to penalize the kids who perhaps are, watching over younger siblings and they can't do everything at once.
Is the intent of this policy that, let's play out the example that Steve gave. I just don't want to get up at 8:30 for my first class, so I'm going to skip that and watch it in the evening. Is the expectation of this policy that a parent is calling in to notify a teacher or, the school of that? If I don't call in and say, Zach is not going to be present for his 8:30 a.m. Math class, and then Zach doesn't show up, or, if I don't call it in and Zach doesn't show up, that's going to prompt a phone call to me. Is that correct? So I would be notified, hey, Zach didn't show up at class. Zach is truant from class. So as a parent, I would get notified, I would be aware of it, and it would be handled, I guess, the same way it would be if you're truant from physical school, to some extent. That's how I maybe see this playing out, is that there is a notification process in hand, that a parent is calling that in. And if they're not, then there's follow up with that parent that a child didn't attend the synchronous learning. Unless they've been given, unless they've said my child will never be there at 8:30 on a Monday because I have a known conflict. But if you don't provide that sort of immediate information about your child's schedule, that there's going to be a notification process in place to inform parents of kids who are not attending that synchronous learning session. Is that correct?
Yes, that is our intent, that's why we were asking parents to let us know that, so that we know if it's excused or not excused, and that we would give more of if you knew it was consistent, we wouldn't ask parents to call every day. But that's exactly why we wanted to keep attendance of the synchronous, so that we could share that data with parents if they wanted to know that. But under state law, parents can only excuse for up to 10 days. Now, that doesn't mean we take parents to truancy court if we know that there's a explanation for that. But we wanted to have a balance of having a way for students to attend who we know just are not able to be there live through no fault of their own. And the best example we have right now is what DPI allows for virtual schools. And this might be one of those policies that we have to try for a little while. And we may come back and revisit, because we haven't done this on a wide scale effort before.
I guess I think we're saying two different things in 2 and 3. So what I'm hearing in 2 is that scheduled instruction includes synchronous sessions, and you have to be excused from that. But 3 then says that, well, even if you're not excused, you're okay if you don't do the synchronous learning if you complete and submit your assignments to the educator. I mean, and does that mean, what if we got somebody who's not attending synchronous learning and is just doing the bare minimum with their assignments, even if we know that that's not their potential, right? They're getting a pass on that.
Well, you're right in terms of talking about the challenge, Steve, because we're trying to merge 2 different systems, right? That we have a state law that says parents can only excuse up to 10. Yep. So if I can never be at my 8:30 live class, technically I can only excuse my child for 10 days, right? Versus a system where we want to know if our students are present, so we know that they're okay, and if we need to reach out and support them just as we would if we were in person. But we also know that some of our students are not going to be able to watch the live or be present for the live session and need to watch our recording. So we're trying to merge 2 very different ideas. Yep. And so I don't know how to merge those other than using DPI's model for virtual schools.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I mean, that's been what we've looked at for the last 10 to 12 years. And when we've looked at a new model, doesn't matter how many times a student gets into a school or is in a classroom, if they're getting the materials from us and the type of recorded information, and they master the curriculum to the extent that we understand their abilities to be, then who cares if they are there 5 days a week, every day? I mean, that, as long as we get them where they have to go through that means. I think where I'm troubled with is if 2 means scheduled instruction is both in-person and synchronous, I think we have a conflict there. If 2 means just scheduled in-person instruction, whenever that is, unless excused, then 3 becomes, and for the virtual components, that is either synchronous learning or the recorded stuff, you're attending if you're present at that, you submit your assignments to the educator, and the educator assesses the student at least weekly. I mean, I still have a problem with B, completes and submits assignments. If I'm not present for the synchronous learning and all I have to do is to get out of this attendance thing is submit something without any requirement that I pass it or meet, teachers' expectations, and I get a pass just because I've decided to blow off the synchronous learning, I have a problem with that.
I would say that's my issue too, because we base our education on engagement and between student and educator, and we think that's a very important piece, and that seems transactional to me.
And I hear what you're saying. I don't know how to balance that against the needs of families that they may not be able to be present during the day. And you're also that we are virtual for K-12 classes, right? That we have synchronous learning for our youngest learners as well as our high school students. So we also know that those students may not be able to operate the live learning independently. And so how do we balance the needs of our families when what we really talk about is it's the learning that's the most important, right? That students may not be able to be present through no fault of their own, but they're watching the recording and they're doing the assignments and they're as engaged as their situation is allowing them to be. So how do we then say that you're absent? If you're doing what you're supposed to be, you're doing everything you're able to do given the situation of your family.
So I guess from my standpoint, and I'm assuming this got recommended by the policy committee for approval by the board.
Yes, it did.
Okay, I guess I'm okay to vote in favor of it tonight, but with a request that within 2 months we review this to see what our experience is in terms of students participating in the synchronous learning, what the quality of the assignments coming in, to kind of do a loop back just because it's new. I'm willing to sort of ignore for a little bit the plan, but I do have the concerns that I've articulated tonight in terms of what we're expecting from our students. I mean, I think we're expecting full presence and engagement as we would in person.
I would agree. I don't know that we have a feeling yet for, again, what the exception versus the rule is. I wonder if you can handle exceptions in a one-off basis and get pre-approval for an understanding that a family has a parent working or a child is too young to access it, needs to do it later. That's all understandable, but I don't think that should be the rule. It should be the exception that is, in essence, pre-cleared so they don't have to call in every day and you understand their family situation.
I guess my question is, I get A, I'm an or. I wonder if B should be and C, so that there's at least interaction between the educator and the student. So that between B and C, I would look at putting an and instead of an or, that a student is present for synchronous, or they're kind of doing it on their own, like an independent learning, but they're getting feedback at least weekly from an educator.
I think that's where I landed, Krista, as I'm talking through this and looking at it, that I can live with it if we move, A is a present for synchronous learning, and then B and C are combined as an and.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I would
don't know
have
how
to
that
agree with
feels.
that. I'm sorry.
I don't know how that feels to Leslie and Gina, that there's at least weekly interaction, because I guess I'm thinking at students that are online learning during a non-pandemic, that at least they're getting interaction with an educator. And I think that's also an engagement or a check-in piece too, which hits me in terms of equity, making sure we're engaging with families, that the student's doing the work and the student is engaged, because we don't want to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate Kevin's perspective there on, creating the exception or the rule. That the rule should be an interaction, and the exception should be there are going to be some who can't do it on their own or can't be available, but again, should be the exception as opposed to the rule.
I would caution us in using the word exception, because we have students in very different situations. And so it's students in different situations. It's not exceptions. I guess I just want to put that out there, that it's just different situations.
Okay.
Well-
Yeah, I think you understand what I'm trying to say. We can call it what we want, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I guess I really appreciate this dialogue, and I would be in support of what's being recommended, of moving the and statement to consist of B and C, leaving A on its own. Does that seem reasonable from a teacher perspective on, okay, they're going to be doing their assignments, but we're also going to expect teachers to be checking in with those students? Does that seem fair and reasonable?
I mean, at least in purposes of assessing whether or not they're attending so as to not run into truancy issues, for this policy. I would expect that anyway, and I think they'll do that. Leslie and Gina, if we move B and C together, are there going to be some concerns from your operational end?
If a teacher has 100 plus students and they have to personally check in with every child who misses one lesson, it's going to be logistically challenging. But we can figure out some systems perhaps that can support that.
Does it necessarily have to be the teacher, or is it paras, or is it staff that we have that we can use to engage students and check in on students?
Right, and that's what I'm running through my head is what system could we put into place that we could ensure we're doing what we need to do for our students, but we're also being realistic for our teachers.
This is Andy. Just so everybody understands one important thing, this policy also determines whether we get to count students. So we have 9 days to ensure that one of these two, or however we define this, occurs. Usually we'd have 14.
And what would keep us from counting a student, Andy? Where do you see the landmine here?
Just as A is, I'm looking at Steve's proposal here, so I need to pull up the policy. But the way Steve's proposal shows is the and there. Let's say a student doesn't submit an assignment. That could be problematic if a teacher is assessing that. From my perspective, I was looking for as much flexibility as possible, just within those 9 days of being able to count the student.
I can try to clarify that a little bit. DPI has a document and it's alternatives to seat time, basically. It's called like flexible attendance options, where they lay out the different criteria for that. And some of it is based, the traditional model, on seat time. But they outline a proficiency-based model. And their idea for that is that they allow maximum flexibility to determine not just whether you were physically there, even if you didn't do anything, which is kind of the traditional model, or whether you achieved learning, which is the ultimate outcome, regardless of whether you were physically there. Obviously, it was designed for online learning. The difficulty is if you put an and in there, then it's much harder to count students as being present according to that policy, because they have to be there and submit an assignment. Now, clearly that's what we want. It's just that we might be making it much more stringent than a typical year, in which we may have students who show up for a third Friday, but don't do much work. And clearly we want to alleviate that, and we want to address that right away. I think it's easier to do when you're in physical proximity to the student, because you can, talk to them in the hallway, or, Mr. Pliner welcomes them in the door at the front and says, "Hey, how you doing? I noticed you, talking to so-and-so." I think it's just a lot harder in this situation. So I don't know if we want to make it even more difficult to count while we also don't have the supports to be able to address that. And I know we've got good accountability measures on tracking which kids have done things and which haven't, but I think I'd rather go with personally, I'd rather go with, are they learning, rather than were they, did they show up? And I think that's the difficulty here. I'll not that we can do much about it, but I'll also point out that part of this difficulty is that we're combining two functions into one. We're saying that the sort of custodial aspect and the social emotional connection aspect are being combined with the academic learning aspect of a teacher. So we're combining both of those functions, and I think that's where we start to get into the difficulty of wanting both learning and that personal connection to make sure that we're touching base with kids. They're both very important. It's just that It's two different things that we're trying to combine into one function, which in the physical, when we're physically present, we can do. It's a lot more difficult when we're doing this virtually.
So just to clarify for John and for Gina, does the independent learning model reflect 3 options or 2 options for attendance and engagement?
Do you mean DPI's options?
Yes, for independent learning, for those who last year, well before we had the pandemic, were doing independent learning, what is DPI's requirement to count them as a student? Is it 2 of these or 3 of these?
It's actually one of 3 options. One is that they're physically present on third Friday, which I know is not what you're asking. That's sort of the traditional model. The 2 options that DPI provides is that either there's a documented 2-way communication with a student in 1 week between teacher and student, or there is documented completion of an assignment in 1 week. So those are the 2 fully virtual options that do not require attendance. And DPI says that the school board needs to develop a policy to determine which of those will be used. Actually, they don't actually say it's 2. They say the school board can determine how you're going to count it, and they just offer those as suggestions. So I take that back. They don't give options. They give example suggestions, but they put the onus of responsibility on the school board to determine what counts as attendance, with the understanding that proficiency or achievement or 2-way communication are examples of what the school board can count. I'm sure Gina will correct me if I got any of that wrong.
So that's why when we went to policy, we wanted to say, okay, let's have the maximum flexibility to count our students as present, not only for purposes of funding, but really because we know that every family situation is going to be different. And so we want to be able to have kids be counted as present who are watching and doing their assignments and progressing in their learning. But we wanted, if we're not seeing the student and we're not getting assignments, then we wanted our educators to have to reach out at least weekly.
Okay, so it seems to me where we're running into the debate is there might be 2 goals of this policy, or at least there was a primary goal in terms of whether we consider them truant and count them for purposes of funding. And then the second goal is, what is our expectation for them in terms of mastery? Okay, let's just take a non-COVID, let's go back a year ago, is that in terms of the attendance policy, which this is part of, that a student just had to be in the classroom, show up, be physically present, and not necessarily even have to pass the class to satisfy this policy, which would count us for funding, okay? That's different than what our expectation would be in terms of how we handle the student and how we would expect our teachers to deliver curriculum and to assess the student, which would be at a significantly higher plane than just mere presence. So maybe that's where I'm running into problems with this, is I'm inserting into this policy a standard different than the standard than we would have if we had full in-school service and no virtual stuff. Is that fair, Leslie and Gina?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, if the purpose of this policy is just to enforce the truancy law and to assure or define a standard as to when we can count for funding, I'm okay with adoption of the policy as going to be recommended from policy, but that is nowhere close to my expectation of what virtual learning should be in this environment, as it wasn't my standard or expectation of being just satisfied that some student is coming and sitting in a classroom.
Yes, that's fair.
All right. So, well, that was a good debate. To get there.
It
Yeah.
sheds a little different light on it when you get back to the
Right.
fact that it's the truancy policy, not our education policy.
Right. You know, our expectation of virtual learning is going to be the same as our expectation of in-school learning, is that it's more than mere presence. It's active participation. But for purposes of the truancy law and counting students, we're going to put the bare minimum for purposes of counting. But it's got to be emphasized that this isn't you don't get a pass on this if you're a student.
I can maybe alleviate your concern a bit, because I know that the schools, I mean, we did this last in the spring when we had, waivers of everything. I mean, the schools put in place checklists to make sure that every student had been heard from and, accounted for. And we did lots of follow up with the principals and teachers. They had checklists, like making sure, okay, we've heard from these kids, is this kid turning stuff in? Who do we need to follow up with? Where are we tracking the kid? So this policy is really nothing representative of the efforts and the care that was put in, because the teachers are hugely concerned for their students, and the principals put in policies and not policies, sorry, the principals put procedures in place to make sure that students have been communicated with, were heard, were safe, were learning and progressing, and did their utmost to reach out and re-engage them if they slipped at all. So that's a whole different ballgame than what this is concerning. But this, like you said, it's just the minimum. But all those efforts were in place and will continue.
Right. Well, and for those students out there who just, but we heard stories where students just disappeared off the map. There was a certain percentage of those, and under this policy, they wouldn't have been present for synchronous learning. They didn't commit their assignments. At that point, it's going to be the burden on the educator to assess this weekly. So, are we going to, if we pass this from the recommendation of the policy committee, is each teacher going to have to say, like, okay, wasn't present at synchronous learning session this week, and didn't complete assignments, it's now by burden, I got to call or assess.
Yes, that is because that becomes an attendance issue, that we need to know what's going on with that student.
Okay. I have one other question then, and to finish this is in number 4. Do they notify the main office, or do they call the school attendance officer? Because 5 and 6 refer to the school attendance officer making a determination.
State law puts the burden on the school attendance officer, but they are folks in the main office, so it's the same. The attendance, the admin assistants for attendance are our attendance officers, so it's a distinction without a difference.
Okay, but for consistency of the policy, would we use school attendance officer?
That'd be my recommendation, because that's the statutory requirement.
Okay.
We could say the school attendance officer in the main office if you want to combine the two.
Sorry for all the hullabaloo, Anna. But I guess I'm at a place to, okay, if the recommendation from policy is to move forward the draft that we got, with the exception of changing 4 to school attendance officer, I'm okay with that, given our discussion.
I would agree to that amendment as far as changing that, cleaning up that language to be consistent with the school attendance officer. I think it's the same number that we all call the attendance line, right? The 835 I don't remember it off the top of my head, but
Yeah, I was just trying to be easy for parents or families who are reading it. So if we could say the attendance officer in the main office, then they at least know where to call.
sure.
Okay,
Or the school attendance line. I mean, I guess that means, that's what I think of it as, but either way, I'm good with cleaning up that language to say school attendance officer at the main office. That works for me. I guess with that, I think on behalf of the policy board, I would make a motion to recommend approval of policy 433.03.5 with the change in number 4 to say the school attendance officer at the main office.
okay. And
Will
then,
the motion, sorry, will the motion?
yeah, we'll need a
include-
second just because there's an alteration from the
Mhm.
policy, and Tim seconded that. So any further discussion?
Will the motion include what you talked about, which is a review period?
Yeah, exactly what I was gonna ask next.
It doesn't right now. We can make that part of the passage that we talk to policy committee and just instruct them separate from the motion itself that we want to have you come back in a couple months to talk about this.
I mean, is one option to make it, what, a 2-month approval versus just a revisit in 2 months of how the attendance is tracking for
I
students?
think it's just easier from a procedural standpoint to approve the policy than a separate understanding with policy that you're coming back to us at an appropriate time within the next several months to give us some update on this.
Sure.
I would imagine that truancy and engagement is going to be a natural discussion in every board meeting. Obviously, everyone's mind, whether it's in a policy or not. But I think it'd be good to make sure that it's officially on an agenda, just for whatever's sake. But I think it's going to be talked about naturally. I feel more comfortable that it's on an agenda even at the next board. Well, the first board meeting after school starts to assess how things are going.
I agree with Kevin. I think there's going to be unintended consequences with this that we just want to keep an eye on.
Yep,
This
I've
policy.
got a note, and Dr. Bergstrom I see is writing a note too. Good. So the motion on the table is to approve this with the change in 4. Any others discussion? Okay, call the roll.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Mary,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries, policy is adopted. Hey, Anna, I hope 721 isn't as controversial with caffeine.
721 is not controversial. Policy 721 is the school wellness policy. And this was brought to the policy really as a way to formalize an already existing standard within our district, with the fact that our district does not currently offer products that contain caffeine unless it's naturally occurring in some items. But typically, caffeinated beverages are not sold to students and are not available to students. And so we wanted to update our policy to reflect that standard. This is the language that's been included in the revision is the model language from the model policy. So it's really just formally including that in our policy to make that very clear. And so our policy committee discussed that, and given that it doesn't change the current offerings that are available in our school, there were no concerns from our group related to the proposed changes. I guess with that, I will go ahead and recommend approval of policy on behalf of our policy committee of policy 721 school wellness as presented in the packet.
Okay, we've got a motion from policy. Any questions of Anna and the policy committee? Okay, any discussion at all regarding that motion?
Just a note that the nutrition director was also added to this policy. That language is 721.08. So there is a small change there as well. Again, just adding the school nutrition director as the wellness coordinator.
Thank you, Tim.
Anything else? Call the roll.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. Mary?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, motion carries. Policies 721 is adopted as recommended. Takes us to the discussion items. Item D on our agenda, committee reports. Anything else to report, Anna?
No, I don't think I have anything to report right now.
Great, thanks. Thanks for all the hard work, committee. We've had a busy couple meetings with you. Troy, visiting.
Visioning, we met last week. We had 2 agenda items. Number 1 was to discuss the focus areas for the 2021 school year. So we had a really good discussion among the committee regarding those 3 to 5 focus areas that we've talked about, over the past few months. Dr. Bergstrom noted that the administration is working on many things this year. So these 3 to 5 focus areas are those items that we want to be able to look back on when we get to June of 21. We want to be able to look back on and make sure that we've made significant progress on those items to set us up well for the next 3 to 5 years. I would note that, throughout that discussion, I think a lot of value came out of course, the focus areas, but also more long-term planning. So as we're talking about the immediate needs of the district, we're also talking about those things that are out on the horizon a little farther, and so really a beneficial discussion. The second, I guess on that note, the next steps on that is Dr. Bergstrom's going to put together some measurable items on those focus areas and come back to us at a meeting we've set for September 22nd at 5:30. And the committee will provide some feedback to that, and then it will come to the full board, I would expect, in October. The second item that we talked about was the proposal from the administration to draft a revision to 41102. Dr. Bergstrom is going to be putting together a committee of staff members to work on that. That will be based on the board workshop that we had in July and some of those items that we discussed as being important as components of that. So that committee's work will begin in September and will continue in the fall, and we expect that'll be wrapped up before the end of the calendar year. And that's all we had.
Any questions of Kevin and the visioning committee?
Troy.
I promoted you, Kevin.
Kevin.
You can ask me questions as well if you'd like.
Kevin's on the top row now, and the tile switched. Kevin now assumed that the lead pack position. Sorry. Any questions of Troy and the committee? Okay. Thank you, Troy. Thanks, committee. Takes us to informational items E, the Anti-Hate Speech Implementation Committee Report. And Dr. Bergstrom, I'll let you kick that off, and then the floor is yours.
Thank you. So earlier this summer, our school board passed the hate speech policy, and we knew that the policy was much more than just words on paper. It had to be developing a deep understanding of why we would have a hate speech policy and ensuring that everyone was aware that it existed, understood their responsibility related to creating an inclusive environment, and develop an understanding of why it was important that we continue to enforce something like a hate speech policy. So knowing that, what was really important was what happened after the policy was passed. We put together a committee, and Darcy Krieger and Mike Carr were our two OSD administrators who facilitated the committee, which included teachers, principals, and community members. So they have been working since early July with this committee to put together step one of an implementation plan. So tonight, Mr. Carr and Ms. Krieger will be presenting to you how far the committee has gotten thus far.
Great. Katie, are you going to present this, Katie? Cool. So I'll start off. Leslie said a lot of things that I have in my notes that I was going to say, but I'm going to say them anyways. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was just to provide you guys with a brief history of our work. So we started by working with principals before even our first meeting came about to make sure that we had assembled the right people at the proverbial table. So after that, we spent an hour and a half together. We assembled, I believe it's 23 people who got together for an hour and a half on 4 separate evenings to discuss the best way to ensure exactly what Leslie said, awareness and understanding of the policy. So simply, our goal as a task force was to make sure that everyone is aware that the policy exists, and to make sure that everyone understands why the policy exists. So it's important to note that we spent time in a variety of ways. We didn't just have one large group discussion. We broke out into small sessions to dig into stakeholder groups like community, families, and students. We also did anti-racist educational reads from authors like Paul Gorski. We spent time with Dr. Bergstrom on night 1 to ground ourselves in our mission and discuss the work that lay ahead of us. And we also spent time with Gina Jonan, who spent time with our group addressing what kind of questions people had with respect to legal and policy lenses. Each night, the first task was to review our goal, and then we dug deeper into determining how we can begin to achieve the goal. So the other thing that I think is important to let you know is that every night we grounded ourselves in the Oregon School District values. Specifically, we looked at this picture of the apple, and we discussed how the work that we're undergoing has a strong center in each piece of the puzzle that helps define what we value as a district. Katie, can you go to the next slide, please? So on the first night of the task force and every meeting thereafter, we talked about the time that's been invested into this policy because we really wanted to get it right. The policy language itself has been worked on for 2 years with revisions and also taking it to policy committees. We let the group know about the groundbreaking nature of the policy because, as you all know, this is the first hate speech policy in the state. So by that, I mean it's the first standalone anti-hate speech policy outside of bullying and harassment. And so we ground the team in our 2 roles: awareness, specifically ensuring all Oregon stakeholders are aware of the anti-hate speech policy, and understanding, ensuring that all stakeholders understand why the policy exists and know how to contribute to creating a culture of safety and belonging. You can head to the next slide.
Okay, so we wanted to make sure that we recognized the committee because the committee did awesome work, and we wanted to add to the intro that the committee was comprised of an administrator from every school, a teacher or paraprofessional from each school. We had community members on our committee, food service staff and transportation staff. And I think the really cool thing was once we announced that we were going to start looking at the committee makeup, we had our food service staff and transportation staff step in and step up because they knew that the roles that they play with our students and in our school communities are really important. So that was really neat to see. We had 22 participants, and it was really a lot of great energy. It was a pleasure to work on this committee because it was a cross-district committee, and we had a lot of perspectives and a lot of different lenses that people brought. People really enjoyed the meaningful work that we did, and people were super engaged. Like people didn't miss this meeting, and this was a meeting over the summer at night, and people were really, really engaged. And it was like I said, it was a pleasure to work and do. And we added a couple new administrators to our administrative team. Stephen Blue and Maria Rock and David Pivanetti, who were all on this committee and brought a lot of great experience and a lot of great lenses. And one of the things that Stephen said, he's the new associate principal at RCI, that kind of grounded my thinking throughout this process was we have to remind ourselves as we work with this that we're not doing this to people, we're doing this for people. And that was really profound. So I think the reason why, again, we've talked about this in the past, was we've brought this hate speech policy to you, and it's been passed because our kids wanted it, and our kids needed to feel supported, and they needed to make sure that the culture and the community that we're in, they feel safe. So the action steps that we put together for our 3 stakeholder groups, their families and community, staff, and students. And we really wanted to make sure that we built this initiative with very measurable things that we can do right away, and also gather knowledge and information that we can help craft this work going forward. So we want to make sure that we remind people, we know that we did this policy, approved this policy in June, but we want to make sure that we communicate it again to our families. I've already talked with Erica about enhancing our website and putting FAQs together because we know people have had those, and we've gathered those already from not only our students, but our community members and also our staff. So we're really creating a good bank of a knowledge pool for that. We want to continue to work with Nehemiah and our other community partners because we know that those who attended the Nehemiah group, the Nehemiah presentation earlier this summer, that there was a lot of good energy around that and a lot of good knowledge and a lot of good advocacy. So we want to make sure that we're using our community partners and we're crafting messaging and education around some of the things that they can bring to the table. And then the last thing that we've done is we've already included this in the student handbook. So if you've seen the student handbooks as a parent, we've included that in the handbooks already. So those are kind of, again, just very quick and easy action steps where we create awareness and we create understanding, and they're very measurable. And these will be the action steps for our families and communities going forward.
Okay, so the next slide talks about the action steps that our committee came up with for staff. And one of the big ones that I want to start with, even though it's the second bulleted point, is the asynchronous learning session with all staff prior to the start of school year to create a framework for additional learning and understanding throughout the school year. Because like what Mike said, what we've found is super, super important is to build and produce really authentic work around this policy, and without getting feedback from all of our stakeholders and where they are in the process and what their questions are, we won't be able to really do that authentic work where we're all doing it together. So we created this asynchronous learning session that was designed just to let every adult kind of get their hands into the policy, to read it and to think about it. And so the culminating experience on that is that they will create an exit slip, or they'll fill out an exit slip, that will give them the opportunity to tell us what types of follow-up questions they have, so that when we go into the third bullet point, into the schools, we're going to consider creating scenarios for staff to work through collaboratively. But when we do that, then we'll be prepared and we'll have learning experiences that are responsive to and mirror the needs of what the staff at each building say they need. We also talked about using our leadership teams and equity teams to make sure that we're providing staff with the additional organized and scaffolded PD throughout the year. Because we recognize as a team that this isn't a one and done. Just because we've read the policy doesn't mean that we are completely committed to the two goals of the committee itself. So we want to make sure that we're using the entire year and really using backwards design based on the needs of our staff and our students to build the professional development.
And then the last group that we wanted to talk about was obviously our students. And again, this policy was really organic and rooted in our student experiences. And that's why we feel that they're at the core of this policy and of the awareness. So again, we've already included this in student handbooks, so students have this information, but we know we need to distill it down and we need to make it real for them. They have the policy, but it's right now for our students, it's words on paper. So we need to make this more live and more tangible for them to navigate through. We've talked about creating videos for elementary and secondary to introduce the policy. And we also know how important it is for our secondary people, our secondary folks to know what our elementary folks are doing and vice versa. So there is that natural bridge. If I have a second grader now, but that second grader in 8 years will be a sophomore. So we want to make sure that our staff are doing collaboration in grade level bands to ensure that we're reaching the students in a way that we feel is beneficial. We want to continue to educate in our small groups, like the pause and nest and connections, because we know that that's really important too. I think when I spoke with the group last week at our last meeting, you know, there are so many things that are wrong with the pandemic and doing things virtually, but this is another one of those things, because this could be something where we are doing more organic, in-person, real raw kind of training and teaching, and it just makes it that much harder when we're doing it virtually. So I also have a very good appreciation of what our teachers have been doing during the pandemic, because as it's been really hard to lead and facilitate virtually. So I totally can sympathize with that. And then we also wanted to make sure that we address outside of the curriculum. So there's the curriculum piece, but then there's the outside of the curriculum, and where do we touch students? And that can be technology, that can be school transportation, and obviously co-curricular activities, because we want to make sure that this as well as all of our policies are expansive and kind of circle the globe. So we want to make sure that we do not leave or have blinders on in those areas, because as we also know, school transportation, as we heard from our school transportation people, technology has always been an issue. So we want to make sure that we're addressing those areas as well as not just the curriculum.
Okay, so in closing, what we wanted to recognize is that we understand that we have a lot of work ahead of us, but the entire committee, along with Mike and I, are excited about the work because we believe that it is the right work. Over the course of the 4 sessions, we were energized by the ideas of the passionate and creative committee members around the table. And we also recognized that we need to add more voices around the table. So we're really excited about exploring a district-wide equity group that will incorporate the voices of our students. We look forward to building our universal toolkit so that we have a wealth of teaching experiences and curriculum ready in order to provide what we're talking about as just-in-time learning experiences that's developmentally appropriate for all of our kids.
What kind of questions do you have for us?
Thanks. I'll walk through each board member. Thank you guys for the presentation. Troy, any questions or comments?
I don't think I have any questions. I was kind of curious about the kind of the rollout to the students. So I was glad to see the component of advisory and pause and connections and how that's going to play into this. So that was informative. Thank you.
Anna, Tim, you're next.
That was a great presentation. I love to see the great work that's going into the implementation of this policy. I think it's really awesome that our district is taking this on and taking it seriously and taking some real action towards implementing. So thank you for all of the great work that you've put into this. It's really great to see. I just have two quick questions. I guess the first is, when you say technology, I assume you're also meaning social media by technology. So ensuring that students are aware that things that they say and do on their social media sites could impact them in their school. Is that the understanding, right? That there could be some that's affecting learning of someone in our school because of an action on social media that's communicated up front to students, so they're very aware of that. So just wanted to make sure that clarify that. And secondly, I guess I'm hoping that either the FAQ or some of the education or information that we're sharing when we introduce this to not only our students, but our community at large is, how this is different from freedom of speech. How we're not infringing on people's freedom of speech as it relates to an anti-hate speech policy, because I could see that getting a reaction from our community. So I'd like to make sure that that's being addressed up front and right away, because I could see that being a potential source of scrutiny towards the district on implementing this. So I would ask that be really addressed up front and right away through our educational tools. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
Tim, and then Krista, you're next.
Yeah, other than adding just my voice at how much I appreciate how much work has gone into this. I appreciate the fact that you had lots of voices involved, particularly the folks in transportation. I think they have such a unique perspective on things. And as we all know, challenges in this area, oftentimes they happen at school, but oftentimes happen the moment they feel they're outside of the eyes of adults. And so when they get on that bus, I think there's a whole new perspective that the transportation folks bring to the table, because it's a jungle out there at times. And so I appreciate you having them involved. I don't really have any other questions. I just want to pass along my appreciation.
Thank you.
Krista.
Thank you, guys. You guys are, you're a great team. You've thought of a lot of things. And so thank you for spending the time on this. It's really, really important. Just a couple things. One, I want to echo what Tim said in terms of food service and transportation staff on the committee. It's hugely important. And I think that's a great voice that you've included. Second, Mike mentioning areas outside of the curriculum. I love seeing that because, as you know, Mike, in terms of our facility usage and the people that you interact with, our reach as an educational institution goes really far and wide. And so I guess one of my questions is relating to that is, will there be specific strategies associated with educating those entities that use our facilities or that our students interact with, is one. And then second is, unfortunately, I've been made aware of a situation that happened with some of our ninth graders with a racial incident that happened at a basketball court in town. And so for students, will there be strategies about how they handle those situations that don't occur within our educational buildings?
Yeah, those are great questions. And definitely ones that we can add to what we're thinking about rolling out within the curriculum and outside of the curriculum. you've given me some good things to think about. So I will definitely add them to our list and add those to things that we will consider going forward.
Great. Then my last question is just, and I'm sure you've thought of this too, are there some benchmarks that you're looking at where you know, here's where we are, and using, you know, kind of what we're doing in terms of implementation of a place that we want to get to, or what are the things that you're thinking about that will actually change the culture? I'm just kind of curious about those.
I think that's a really great point, and that's why we want to start to get the student voice involved, so that we can feel so we can hear what the students are feeling, so that our benchmark is really coming from the students. Because, like Mike said, really early on, is we want students to understand that this is being done for them, not to them. So without leveraging their voice and getting the benchmark of where we are, it's really difficult to measure our success until we know where we are as we begin this work.
Well, and I think the other thing, that's a really good question, Krista, that one of the other things is we do a climate survey with all of our schools and our kids too. So, you know, do kids feel safe? Do they feel supported? Do they feel like this is a place for them? Or are they still bringing up things that make them feel uncomfortable and not safe at school? So I think we have some metrics to look at and be able to benchmark that data against what we do in the future.
Thank you. I mean, I think the promise that you guys are presenting, that we're doing this for our students, is really, really powerful. And I think that's an engaging, unifying message. So thank you for going that way.
Kevin.
Yes. Yeah, so just without diving back into the detail, I really like the whole concept of it not being done to you. So I'm really glad that kind of whole aspect came up, because you don't want people to start off from a defensive standpoint with all of this. And one of my questions was around how do you measure success, which was just really kind of answered. So I'd love to see maybe past climate surveys at some point, and probably some specific questions that of course will have to be drafted. Maybe they already exist. I've never seen a climate survey, but that are specific to this topic, to make sure that we're moving the needle, and that all the great efforts that the team has put in are paying off beyond just maybe less obvious incidents. Really, how the kids are feeling, are they feeling safe? All that's going to be really great to track. And I guess the last comment I'd make is Troy's comments, and I'd like to actually hear more at some point. Maybe there's minutes from the meetings or something in terms of, you know, how logistically this is going to be rolled out with Pause Connected and some of these other avenues to, you know, actually roll it out. So great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy and Mike, for the work and for the work you're going to do in the future. It becomes more important as we continue to have incidents and issues and National Guard called up around the state. It just speaks ever more to the need to have this proactive educational role in our society as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leslie, opening of school year update.
All right, everybody. Just take me a moment while we here we go. No, hold on, guys. Sorry, it's not Sharon, well, there we go.
You're up. Yep.
Thank you. It just took me a second. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of update of an update on where we are, because as you know, things got exciting Friday night. So as we have been discussing since we started to talk about how we were going to open up schools again, we know that our 5 values are at the center, with equity taking a very prominent role in the decision-making process, and then guiding principles that are helping us to move through and make decisions, certainly with health and safety leading the way. So on Friday night, we had public health emergency order number 8 that came through right around a little after 5 o'clock. And it was specifically telling us that grades 3 through 12 will begin the year virtually. Grades K through 2 can be in person with health and safety precautions, masks as an example, and 6 feet of social distancing. That is still a must, in addition to hygiene practices. And then specific metrics are provided for opening up K2, 3, 5, 6, 12. So this is really what we have been asking for. Now, we know that it's not exactly timed well. We certainly would have preferred this information a long time ago. But as we're reading through studies, or as we're even listening to the information that comes from public health, the question that was never answered is, what should we be looking at to know whether it is safe? And that is the question that they answered with the emergency order. Now, this does have an impact on our plan, certainly. The goals and foundation of our plan don't change. Our ultimate long-term objective is that all students have the option to return to in-person learning when it is safe to do so. Oregon Online and phased restart are still viable instructional models. Oregon Online continues to be fully online, and the phased restart approach continues to phase in as allowed. And as said from the beginning, we will follow public health and the indicators that they give us. What we didn't have before Friday was the specific indicators. So now we feel like we have something to rely upon as we safely bring our students back in. So for Oregon Online, of course it continues, and it continues with about 23% of our students, and that's approximately 950. So the Oregon phased restart, that's the rest of our group. So for this, 4K through 2 will begin as planned with some adaptation, and I'll get to that in a moment. Grades 3 through 4, that is truly, I think, the really disappointing part, is that our plan, phased restart, was to bring in grades 3 and 4 for afternoon learning sessions with their teacher. But now they'll have to be phased in slightly later with grade 5. So we have the 4K2, the 345, and the 612. Now, just to give you a little bit more information on how this will work, note for the 4K2, we are choosing to treat our 4K the same as kindergarten. So we're putting our 4K students in that same grade band as the kindergartners, the first graders, and the second graders. And we're meeting with a group of teachers actually tomorrow, 4K2 teachers and principals, to talk about the best possible format for our K2 group, our 4K2 group, because as I mentioned, it's still a 6 feet of physical distancing requirement, which means we wouldn't be able to bring in all 21 or 22 students into the classroom at the same time. Consequently, we still have to investigate the models for this portion. And we've already done some of this work, so we're not starting from scratch. We just really want to get some teacher input tomorrow. And grades 3 and 4, as I said, they will need to have their afternoon groups be virtual groups for now, but we have indicators as to when we can bring them in safely. And it's really only 4 weeks of that solid metric. So we're hoping that 3, 4, 5 perhaps could even come in October if the health metrics allow. And then, of course, grades 6 through 12. That plan is a little bit different because we have to be down to a 14-day average of 19 cases or less for 4 weeks in a row. And I know many of you who might be watching at home are thinking, but why are the students in, and then fill in the blank district outside of Dane County, why are they able to be in person? Well, what I think is really important for everyone to understand is that what happened Friday night was an emergency order from public health. as opposed to other counties where their public health department has either not given a recommendation or only gives a recommendation, and then school boards or superintendents make the decision on the format. However, in Dane County, this was in a public emergency order. That's quite different. So as I mentioned, our phased restart by grade band, you see we'll start off the same as we planned, with our youngest kids coming in for these short sessions. And the reason we'll start that way, and I don't know if we'll start that way for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, probably 3, but we'll start that way to make sure that they're in really small groups when they're with their teacher and another adult, to ensure they understand how to keep their mask on, how to keep physical distance, and really get the feel of school with these what will seem to be really odd parameters. And then after we have them for a few sessions and we are feeling confident that they can do this and do this well, then we will implement a plan to increase in-person instruction. And we'll decide in the next couple of days what that plan will look like. We just felt it was really important to get some teacher input on what models will best meet student learning needs. Grades 3 through 5 all begin online, and then the online, we'll have small online cohorts for students to get individualized attention from their students, and we'll continue to monitor the metrics from public health. We'll be looking at the numbers that come out every Thursday, and we're hoping that it will only take us 4 weeks to be able to begin to bring in our grades 3 to 5 on a more regular basis. And then finally, grades 6 through 12, they are all beginning online, and we'll offer small groups for online supports, and we'll continue to monitor metrics. Now, I would say the earliest possible that our grades 6 through 12 will come in, considering the 3 through 5 phase needs to be 4 weeks in a row, and then the 6 through 12 phase is an average of less than 19 or fewer cases on average in a 14-day period. So, and that's for 4 weeks, we have to see that. So I'm assuming that we won't be able to bring in our grades 6 through 12 for 8 additional weeks. But I'm also attending every learning session offered by public health in order to gain a better understanding of the order and how it's impacting us. So this really is a continuous process. We're continuing this collaborative process to design options for phasing in what everything will look like. And as I mentioned, we're looking to increase the in-person attendance for 4K2 very soon. That means that we're on the planning now, and we'll be able to incorporate input from all of the stakeholders who are part of that. Same for students in 3 through 5. And of course, our operational teams are continuing to prepare for school to start in just a few weeks. So we're working out all the details with respect to health and safety, procedures and transportations. And we've spoken about this a number of times, so I won't go into great detail, but know that that work is ongoing, because we are expecting students in our classrooms, our youngest students, beginning September 14th. And of course, another important part that I don't want to forget to mention is staff training, because staff have been engaging in professional learning all summer long to be prepared for whatever the fall brings. And then once we knew that virtual learning would certainly be a portion of the instructional plan for the fall, we spent a lot of time preparing professional learning experiences for staff so that they are ready to provide the high quality experience that our families require. So our staff has had opportunities for technical training, so they're fully able to utilize the tech platforms such as Seesaw, or Google Classroom. They've also had training in best practices for online learning, both instructional strategies and relationship building. Over the course of this week, they are receiving training on meeting the SEL needs, social emotional learning needs of our students in the new environment. And all the while, they are continuing their pathway PD on equity and highly effective practices. I also want to take a moment to address how all of this is impacting our student athletes and our students who are in other co-curricular activities, because that has been a significant impact for our students. What we know now is that all fall sports will participate in a fall to spring model, meaning our fall sports are being moved to a time period that has been created in the spring. It will be a shortened season. Coaches will be reaching out to fall athletes for virtual workouts and team activities. We'll be providing virtual learning opportunities for our coaches and our students. And we also plan to continue to offer our clubs and other activities. As a matter of fact, I believe they're even more important now than they have been before, because our students need multiple ways to connect to school. So what's next for our families? Well, we're committed to building the best possible experiences for learning experiences for our students and for the families, because this is all connected. Focusing in on the five things that you see here, the importance of building relationships, because we know that that is the foundation of all the other things. And we'll talk about that in another moment. We've taken a lot of care in putting together learning formats that were designed to be appropriate for every grade level. And I'll show you some of that with sample schedules. We also know that everybody, their time is valuable, and we need to make things, our processes simple. People don't want to click 10 times to reach the information that they need. We also know that people need clear communication from us, clear and frequent, and also that we will be adjusting as we move along, because new information is coming out all the time. And so we have to be flexible, we have to adjust, because we know that we want to continue to be pushing the edge related to the best possible experience for our students. So now just a few details. Online registration started today. This is to ensure we have updated contact information, photo and video release permissions. And this is really important because we need people to sign the video release permission so that when we are filming lessons, we are able to film them and show them later. The video release permissions are very important for that. Also to review the school handbook with the new COVID procedures. Our Ready, Set, Go conferences. So these are 20-minute meetings with a student and a family member for the purpose of making a connection with that teacher. So grades 4K through 2 will either be in person or virtual, depending on the family preference. And note that we are trying to mirror the educational experience. So that's why grades 3 through 8 will, their Ready, Set, Go conferences will be virtual. And teachers are contacting, they started already today, families this week to coordinate the times. We want to be able to meet all of our families. For our older grades, orientation video for our freshmen, that was just sent out this weekend. Our teachers are making introductory videos to send to their students, introducing them as people and as educators. And that's happening the week of September 1st. You'll see in the 9/12 schedule that there is a daily advisory period for our students in order to promote and build on those connections. And you're also well aware of the neighborhood model and the fact that this is the first year for the neighborhood model, which is a group of students with a counselor and an administrator in order to promote that sense of responsibility, accountability, and belonging for everybody. So we all know that we are a part of something and there are people who are looking out for us. So for grades K through 8 for device and material pickup, our kindergarten through grade 8 students will be picking up their devices and all learning materials at the Ready, Set, Go conferences. And for those who are having virtual conferences, there will be curbside pickup at schools, and you can see the times below. For our students in grades 9 through 12, there is curbside pickup for their devices and their learning materials. More information will be sent to families on this, but you'll note that there are 3 days where this is possible. So September 8th is when the classes begin. All students will start online on September 8th. So that first week, it's Tuesday, Thursday, Friday are the times when synchronous learning is offered. Wednesdays, there will always be learning opportunities on Wednesdays, but they'll be more online and more independent, other than perhaps small group meetings with paraprofessionals. So our online learning has to be based in relationships. That is what makes it work. There's a mix of real-time classes and recorded classes. Much greater focus on interaction, teacher and student interaction, and student to student interaction. Of course, the learning is based on standards and standards mastery. Projects and assignments are being prepared very thoughtfully and with best practices related to virtual learning in mind. Very clear expectations for what success looks like, including feedback on students' progress toward what success looks like for them, and then a simple and consistent digital platform. As an example, our students in kindergarten through grade 2 are using the platform Seesaw. And so our ITLTs, our instructional technology learning specialists, they have been working on creating a similar platform or a template for all teachers to work off of, so that our students, whether they're in third grade or first grade, when they log into Seesaw, it looks the same. And they'll be able to access their assignments and the lessons that are either live or recorded through the little buttons that you see here. So these landing pages are really important because they help our students stay organized and understand what it is they're supposed to do next. And then, of course, there's also a Google Classroom template. So that'll be helpful so that we know our Google Classrooms will look somewhat similar as our teachers are creating those too. And next, I'll walk you through some schedules. So we know our first full week of in-person learning for our youngest learners, 4K through grade 2, begins September 14th. Families received in the mail a letter that told them who their teacher was and what day of the week they are assigned to an in-person cohort. And of course, we know that Wednesday will be the student work time, catch-up time, and it's a collaboration day for our staff and a time for cleaning in the building. Sample K4 schedule. This was sent out to our families, and it's on our website so other people can access it. And we're also ensuring that daycare sites like After School Club, they also have access to this too, so they know the expectations for our students. So our teachers will be able to schedule, you can see the flexibility, for instance, the morning meeting 7:50 to 9:30. Our teachers will have the ability to schedule in that time block, morning meeting, reading, writing, and math. And so it won't necessarily be identical for every single class, but those blocks of time will be similar. And you'll also notice that in the afternoon, that's when our youngest students are either coming in for in-person cohorts or they are having small groups in a virtual manner if they're in Oregon online. Because everything I'm saying about the importance of relationships, it doesn't make any difference if they're in phased restart or Oregon online. All of that is important. It's important no matter the format of the instruction and no matter the time period in which students actually come in for in-person learning. You'll see our 5-6 schedule. Another example of large blocks of time that'll include the pieces that we know are really important, which is our morning meeting, the opportunity to ground the students in the day and in their schedule and connect with one another. Reading, writing, and social studies is in a block, math and science in a block. And then also we have put a lot of emphasis, no matter the grade level, in ensuring our students can continue with their rotations classes, because we're really committed to the idea of a well-rounded education. We don't want students to not have general music or art or world language or any of the things that we offer for the time period that we need to be virtual. And then for our 5-6 kids in the afternoon, they'll have a combination of real-time and recorded instruction related to band, choir, and orchestra, and small group learning. 7 and 8, you can see that the schedule has been condensed a little bit so that the classes that were every other day for a semester are now every day for a quarter, in order for our students to have fewer classes at one time. And you'll see that a lot of the real-time and recorded lessons are in the morning, and a little bit more small group work and independent work in the afternoon. And then our 9-12. Our 9-12 schedule has been condensed into 4 classes per quarter. And we know we've spoken about this in a couple of other presentations, so you understand that it's a block format. But one of the things I want to note when you look at this is that there is a time set aside every single day for advisory, because no matter the student's age, connections and with teachers and with one another continue to be a really important part of what school offers our students. So moving forward, it really is the old plan, act, study, do cycle that you can see here. We're continuing to refine and adjust our plans based on what we're learning from our stakeholders, and certainly based on input from public health. We continue to implement new processes and procedures, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this has forced us to re-examine every process that we have and make adjustments to it. We're also continuing our preparations for welcoming our students and families, and continuing to communicate as the information becomes available. So that's just an update for you and for whomever may be listening, so you know that we are in the midst of responding to emergency order number 9, and making sure that we are in compliance and planning for the highest quality learning experience, no matter the format.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. I'm going to wander through the board then to have them ask you questions or make comments, okay?
Really.
Good. Krista, you're up, and Kevin, you're next.
First, I want to compliment you, Leslie, in terms of exhibiting calmness and adaptability and flexibility. This has been a really challenging time, and it's noticed, and people in this community notice that, and they appreciate you and the district team. That I think it's nice that people, there are some people that are upset, but a lot of people are really granting grace and really understanding that this is difficult, and they're trying to adapt as well. So thank you for that. I think the other piece I will say is, you just touched on it. You guys are reinventing education in Oregon School District. Not only are you improving virtual learning that you did last spring, but you're changing how we educate kids in general. High school going to a block schedule. All these different things. So I just don't know if people understand the exponential work that you're doing in reinventing how we deliver education to students, and the work that teachers are doing. So I really want to recognize that and thank you all. You're doing really innovative work, and it's pretty amazing. Second, I have a 9th grader this year, so I just watched 2 videos from Jim Pleiner and our 2 new board reps, and Andrew Palmer and Chloe Jacobson, and they did a great job. Those are really helpful tools, because we know people process information in different ways, in terms of you're sending emails, you're delivering videos, you're doing things on Facebook. So I want to thank you for that too. It's not an easy situation, but you guys are doing so well. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Flanagan. And also, the reason it is a lot to redo everything, but it's a credit to our educators, really, that what's been able to be accomplished. And that means our teachers, our counselors, our social workers, certainly our principals, and just a district office team that I wouldn't trade for a thing.
Kevin, and then Tim, you're up next.
Yeah, so I'd just like to echo Krista's compliments for sure, and I'm sure all the other board members will agree that the work that's been done, hopefully there'll be no more surprise emergency orders this late in the game for you to adjust to again, with all the hard work that's been done. And from a performance perspective, as Krista said too, from a calmness perspective, I certainly would be as calm. So congratulations and kudos for that for sure. And I'm really look forward to seeing the fruits of all the labor in terms of the improvements in the virtual learning from what we experienced obviously early and having to adjust so quickly and having never dealt with such a situation before. The face-to-face virtual learning is going to be very interesting to see how kids respond to that, and how it'll be much better education. I think we all agree to that. So, looking forward to seeing how that works, and I'm praying that the situation changes so we get more of the kids to school. And I'm gonna have to study kind of the metrics. But if you're talking about 19 cases, not to get into that necessarily, but is that in countywide 19 cases?
It is. It would be a 14-day average of 19 cases or below for 4 weeks in a row.
Wow. Okay. All right. No other comments.
Tim,
I
and
echo,
Anna, you're not.
without question. I echo what Kevin and Krista have said about all the preparation and the willingness to adjust as necessary at the last minute. It's overwhelming to me to hear about it. I can't imagine being involved in the day-to-day planning of it. One thing I really do appreciate is your willingness to try something new, this block scheduling for high school, for instance. I think we will find that when all this clears, we'll find some great proofs there of how well that works. And we've been talking about it for years. It's nice to see it in practice, even if it's in temporary practice, for lack of a better term. So I really do appreciate all the things that we've talked about in the past, and how you've had time to somehow squeeze in some new thing that we've been wanting to try, even with all of the have to things. So thank you to you and all of the educators who have put a lot of time into this.
Okay, I think I'm up next. Okay, great, thanks. Great presentation, such great information to kind of get an update on where we land after the emergency order. So really appreciate that. I think it's, I guess I'm really hopeful that we are talking 4 weeks, that we can get our 3rd through 5th graders back into this in-person rotation as well. I really hope that that's the case, because it's just, we want to get our kids back in these schools as soon as we can, right? And so I'm going to just hope for that. I really love seeing in the schedules the connections time for 7th, 8th grade, the advisory time for high school. I mean, talk about putting into action something that we've talked about is so important, making those connections. So thank you for prioritizing that and making time for that in the schedules. I think that's really huge, and I hope that that goes a long ways on helping kids feel more connected in this really virtual, remote environment. So I think I'm just really, I loved seeing that. So thank you so much for incorporating that into the schedule. I really don't have any other comments. I think this is an excellent plan based on the metrics that we currently have in front of us. And like everyone else has said, I can't say enough positive things about the amazing and incredible work that all of you have been doing. Thank you so much for being leaders during this time.
Thank you.
Troy,
Am I up, Steve?
you are up. Kevin.
So a couple of standout items for me. Great presentation. I was really encouraged to see that you're already planning for increased in-person attendance for K2, which might be as soon as 3 weeks. We don't know, but I hadn't heard that time frame before, so that was really encouraging, and I was really happy to hear that. And one thing that I really like about our phased restart with our K2 in being a couple of hours once a week is that we're going to learn so much operationally and logistically from that is just going to help us do a better job of phasing in an increased duration when we can bring those students back, and those little things like, you know, keeping your mask on and staying on the side of the hallway in the, you know, walking in the correct direction down the hallway. All those things we're going to learn how to handle those things, and you know, and I hope that we can spread that knowledge throughout the district and learn from it district wide. You mentioned, you know, the importance of clubs and activities and how that's even more important right now, and I just couldn't echo that enough, and would really encourage us to, you know, expand those clubs and activities and try to reach our students to increase that their social outlets in a positive way as school ramps up here. And then also another standout was, you know, adjusting as needed, and you covered this a couple of different times, but we're not going to get it right. We're not going to get everything right at the start, and we just have to be flexible and willing to learn and change as we go. So you understand that, but I think it's important to just you know, reiterate that's such an important part of this process. And then lastly, I just have a question on one of the displays that you showed was the Seesaw web page and the help button there. And it kind of triggered a thought that I've had. Some of us don't like to ask for help. And I know, like at the high school level, teachers are available by email and students can reach out that way. And I know that our teachers will respond if they're contacted, but I'm wondering if there are mechanisms within our software that help kind of send a signal to teacher if a student is, you know, clicking that help button 20 times, or at the high school level on Google Classroom, if they're somehow not reaching the content as they should be. And I'm just curious if there's a trigger that would help alert staff to those situations.
So you're saying, is there a technology trigger that would alert us?
Exactly. Something that doesn't require a student to reach out.
John, do you know if there's any way that we would know if they're clicking on their help button 10 times a day? Because that would be really helpful information.
Yeah, in that current iteration, I don't think there is. I'm sure there is a way. I don't think it's built into that particular Choose Your Own Adventure, but that's something we can look into.
And I'm asking from experience. My daughter was one of those students who doesn't like to ask for help and just wasn't finding her way last year. And you know, I don't know that what she was doing would have been able to be tracked or anything, but it was just a thought. So
thank you.
And that's all I had. I won't restate other board members. I think they all did such a great job of commenting on the quality of work that's been done. So I would echo that.
Thank you, board members. Every week, Leslie and I check in at least once or twice a week. And we have been checking in weekly with our OEA leadership. If you guys could, are you guys hearing me? Give me a thumbs up or not. I'm kind of frozen here. We're good? Okay. But every week, so I'm on the phone with Leslie or doing one of these things at least 2 or 3 times a week, and at least once with the OEA leadership. And if you could hear the number of detailed questions and the operational questions that they're working through every day and week, and then the model keeps changing on them, it's pretty impressive. And board members, we've been at work with this with our administrative team since, you know, March and planning this. And so we get a way different view of what's going on than the general public. And I think we've done a really good job of communicating to the public what's going on. But the more board members that we can do to talk with the community about not only you know, the hard work, but the level of communication that's going on between us. It's been really impressive. You know, I look around at the 6 other board members here. We're all been pretty significantly involved in running organizations or being at the top of organizations and seeing how organizations run structurally. And to every one of us, I think, as board members, have viewed what our administrative team has done over the last 6 months and been just totally amazed from an organizational standpoint. And those pats on the back don't come from this group of people without there really being that degree of effort going on. We recognize great work when we see it, and we're seeing great work. And so on behalf of the board, to all of the administrators and to you, Dr. Bergstrom, thanks, because it's truly exceptional work. And to our community, I want to leave you with this. Dr. Bergstrom and I had the opportunity to do an orientation session with our new teachers on Monday, and it was really surreal having to talk with them virtually, but we got it done and we got it accomplished, and it was effective. That the last slide that we left with had one word, and that word was kindness.
I think that kindness has played a significant role in this entire process. When I listen to my colleagues from around the state describe their situations, they don't have the opportunity to experience the type of kind feedback that we get from our community members. Even when they don't agree, they are showing, as was mentioned earlier, grace and kindness. And it's really
it's really been a distinguishing characteristic of our community, is because, you know, it by and large has been a communication directed at kindness, because we all have one goal in mind, and that's the best education for our kids. And we all want our kids back in school like it was before then. And we know that's not going to happen. And what has really been pervasive in this community is that sense of kindness and recognizing, while it's not perfect and we might think of a different view, number one, we know everybody's stroking in the same direction and is working really hard, really hard. So, you know, that I think that really took our new teachers. That was a good last slide to end with. And I get choked up when but you know, it's been, you know, 22 years of working at a public education system, and you know, when it gets turned upside down, we're not trying to do this on purpose, you know, and we care about all 4,000 of our kids and all of our teachers and all of our staff. So the second word on that side was family. So it's been a tough process, but I think we're all learning from it. And I hope we as a community keep that spirit of family and kindness going forward. And hopefully we are able to integrate our kids into school on an in-person basis, and do so in a way that's the most healthy for all of us and the most safe for all of us. So sorry for the little bit of length, but you know, we get a view that, you know, others don't get that insight. And I would hope that people could see this. If they just, people don't know how many hours our administrative team is working. It's just unbelievable. So, you know, thank you. Enough of me. Thank you, guys. So that goes to closing. Future agenda. Leslie, once again, Leslie and I haven't even been able to talk about an agenda 2 weeks from now. We're just trying to figure out today. So we'll get that to you. No.
Yeah.
Yep. So superintendent report, Leslie, anything new going on that you haven't talked about?
Well, you hit on it a little bit. Our new educators started with us last week, and that was really exciting. And while, being together virtually isn't quite the same, I think we accomplished a lot of the same things. And I shared with you in the weekly a snapshot of the Padlet that the new educators filled out at the end of a presentation John and I did on Thursday. And what kept coming up was the fact that it's consistent, that the message was consistent throughout all presentations throughout their entire experience. Because they were with us for 4 days, right? And then they saw John and I present together at the end. And I think that's extremely important, is that we are consistent about what is important, where our focus should be, because that is also what's carried us through a time of crisis. We know what's important. So it was very good to meet all of these new people that we are so glad we hired, and to have them feel that sense of consistency, because that's what we're striving for. And then this week, all of our existing staff get to come back in a virtual manner, and that is also very exciting. So our principals have been preparing back to school professional development for them, and there are also opportunities that have been prepared outside of their school, but as a part of the district. So the teachers are doing a lot of learning and planning in this next week, and it'll just be really nice to have everybody back on board. Just want to mention too that yes, the public health announcement, the timing was unfortunate, but I'm glad to have metrics, because now we know what we're shooting for. We know what numbers we should be looking at. And although the plan could change, at least there is a plan, and I'm grateful for it. And that's really my closing is I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to work here, and thank you all for that.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. All right, checkout. Before I go through the boards, we're at 9 o'clock and we've got a closed session. One thought was, we've got an annual meeting where I don't think we'll probably have much of anything afterwards, Dr. Bergstrom. Maybe we could do an hour after that with the board.
Sure.
I don't want to shortcut this and and just be real rushed tonight by going through that. Are you guys okay with doing that, or do you want to spend 15, 20 minutes talking in closed session tonight? I want to get some feedback on that. How are you at? Board members?
I'd be okay shifting it to the annual meeting. At least then we can have Heather engaged in that conversation as well. Hopefully have full board.
Yeah. Krista, you okay with that? I see your head nodding. Tim, you
good.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Troy, you good?
Yeah.
Kevin?
And either way.
Yeah. We'll evaluate. We're not going to do an evaluation of you, Leslie, but we'll figure out how we're going to do that at some point. But
Well, you know what? We have a vision.
Given the length of meetings.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, I'll be able to present some thinking on
Correct.
metrics at the vision meeting, and then you'll be able to talk about it at the annual meeting. So the timing might actually work very well.
Terrific. Thanks. Good. So let's do that. We'll bag the closed session for tonight. Really good work tonight, board members and administrative team. I'm going to go through to see if anybody has any checkout. Krista?
Just one thing. One thing that Leslie did not mention that I want to compliment her on is not only is she working very hard on the education of our students, we're also meeting with community members, faith community, Friends of Oregon School District about families and helping them during this period in terms of childcare, mentoring and tutoring, or I'm meeting with John and Andy about internet access. So I want to thank you for having those conversations too, and you guys being concerned about our whole child and all of our families to get them through this. So thank you.
Tim?
I don't have a lot to add. I just want to make sure that we keep communicating with the community because we do get questions from time to time. I think a note that I read from Jim Vogt earlier is one of those questions. It's important to get back to him to let him know what's going on. And we know that shifting decisions affect shifting spend as well. And so I want to make sure that if the shifting decisions that have been made most recently require us to open that discussion back up, then we should do that. So that's all I had to mention.
Great. And Tim, I'll be in contact with you about that, and you and I can kind of walk through those issues and work with it. And I'll call Jim too and
That'd be
check
great.
in with. Yeah, good. Because that's exactly what we need to do as a board, to continue to communicate. Troy.
Nothing.
Okay, Kevin.
Nothing beyond what Tim brought up. I think it's just important that we continue to keep in mind that we're the stewards of our taxpayers' money, and not only be responsive, but be cognizant of what's going through our community members' minds. And it starts with communication, and at some point it might start with tough decisions, but hopefully we won't get to that point.
Thanks, Kevin. Anna.
I don't have anything for checkout.
Yep, nor do I. So I just need one more motion, folks.
This is Anna. I would move to adjourn.
Second.
Thanks, Tim.
Do I have a second?
Yeah, Tim.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, Katie.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries, and we are adjourned at 9:05. Be well, everyone. Thanks.